Bertong kunat!
Daryong Dagol!
Ano tong balitang pinagkakalat mo dito sa luwa ko, ha?
Anong balita?
Huwag ka na magmakamangam pa!
Ayun ba? Ha? Hindi ba totoo naman? Nasabi ang lunas sa COVID. Alam mo ba kung nasaan ang mayaw? Nasaan ka tayo? At sa fake talaga yung ads sa Revolution.
Ungas ka ba? Ano ba pinagsasabi mo? Saan mo pinagkukuha yan?
Huh, syempre, nag-research ako, no? Sa Tuktuk University. Palibasok kasi at umugot ka na at laos, kaya hindi mo alam yun. Ano, ha?
Lord naman! Magpaulan ka naman ng katalinuhan!
Reliable source of information, sari-saring content na isinulat ng mga eksperto, mga librong de kalidad na abot hanggang sa doomsday, tumawag ka lang sa akin. By the way, hindi ako si Lord. Ako si Vibal.
O pre, tingnan mo to. Di ba sabi ko sa'yo totoo ang EDSA Revolution?
Oo nga, no? O tapos ito, wala pala talaga sa Naga ang bulkang Mayon.
Sabi ko sa'yo eh.
For many administrators, teachers, For many administrators, teachers, students, and parents, online learning was and continues to be a saving grace throughout the pandemic. Some would agree, others would disagree. But let's bear in mind that it allowed the children to stay on track in their academic journeys and provided an alternative option for instructors to continue doing their job if in-person learning becomes out of reach. While online learning has had many positive outcomes, it hasn't been a flawless transition. Classroom discipline and overall management, for example, have become more complicated by the pandemic. From remote learning to social distancing requirements, in-person classes, and the general unpredictability posed by the quarantines. That is why different modes of learning then again stood out, but even thought of these as new ones. But the truth is these have been existing even before the pandemic happened. Although no matter what learning model we use in our institution or in our school, each type comes with its own set of unique challenges in regard to managing the day-to-day classroom. That is why I welcome you all to our session today, Classroom Management Enhancing Hyflex Learning. Before I proceed with the meat of our discussion, let's go down the memory lane. Let's have a throwback. March 2020, when all classes were suspended because of the pandemic with no definite date to resume. During these times, what were you thinking, dear educators, colleagues, administrators? Others would think of or ask, what will happen now? Some would question, how are we going to continue the classes? Paano na kaya yung lesson ko? Isa na namang problema, or others would even say, ang hirap na nga ng face-to-face classes. And one of which we usually thought of over and over again is how are we going to manage our classes? Let's define the two key words in our session today. One is classroom management, followed by Hyflex learning. Let's begin with classroom management. So when looking through the internet or the dictionary and we ask some student, what do they think of when we ask or hear the word classroom management? Most of them would say behavior, disruptions, order, rules. Well, these are all true. But there's a common misconception about classroom management. Okay, the thing is that we become too restrictive, implementing rules, policies, and with this kind of setup, if we become too limited or too restrictive, learning as well would be restrictive. Okay? What I like about this definition that I'll be sharing with you is the goal. Okay, so allow me to read with you. Classroom management can be defined, according to Winston and Schaefer, as the action teachers take to establish and sustain an environment that fosters students' academic achievement, as well as their social, emotional, and moral growth. What's the best about this definition is that it emphasizes that the goal of classroom management is not order for order's sake, which is our common misconception when we speak of classroom management. But according to them, but order for the sake of learning. Now, together with classroom management, now that we are in the online setup, many kinds of learning modalities has been presented or have been presented. We have hybrid learning, blended learning, and now we are introduced to Hyflex learning. And according to Biati 2019, a hybrid flexible course design enables a flexible participation policy for students whereby students may choose to attend face-to-face synchronous class sessions in person or online without physically attending the class. Well, some of the schools in the Philippines have implemented this kind of learning setup. Okay, so to give you a visual representation of how Hyflex learning happens, so you have here pictures. So one class would be in face-to-face, one would be learning through online live stream, while others would be doing their lessons asynchronously. Okay, and a better representation to give you an idea of what Hyflex learning is through this photo. Yan. Okay. Now, other than knowing or understanding the meaning of Hyflex learning, I would also like to share with you something that is very important as a concept by Dr. Brian Beatty, which I find truly helpful in preparing, conducting, and even monitoring my classes, may it be online, face-to-face, or asynchronous. And this is what they call the principles of Hyflex learning. Now, the principles of Hyflex learning has 4 principles or pillars, as they call it. First, they have the learner choice, equivalence, reusability, and accessibility. When we speak of the learner choice, the learners choose the mode of engagement that works for them. Choosing to implement this principle requires, though, the instructors value providing participation choice to students more than he or she values forcing everyone into the best way of learning as a set of content. In this matter, okay, in this principle of Hyflex learning, courses must have fully developed participation alternatives. Ayan. So may it be conducted face-to-face, asynchronously. Online participation may include synchronous same time and asynchronous time-independent setup. So you have to determine how much flexibility students need to adequately participate. And this is one of the major problems that we face, their participation now that we are in this kind of setup. Most situations require some level of time independence in addition to location independence and requiring an asynchronous online alternative for our students in the asynchronous setup. Next, we have the equivalence principle of Hyflex learning. So in this one, it provides learning activities in all participation modes, which lead to equivalent learning outcomes. So one of our fears before is that if some students are in face-to-face, they would have better understanding or learning. Okay, and those in asynchronous, they have more tendency to have lesser understanding or learning. At this level of learning objectives, it has to be in reference to teaching mode wherein it should omit, okay, the idea that it should only be designed to provide students with opportunities to meet learning objectives regardless of the teaching mode. So equivalence does not imply equality. However, an online learning experience, example, asynchronous discussion, may turn out to be much socially interactive than a classroom-based discussion activity. In each case, however, students should be challenged to reflect upon learning content. So may they be in asynchronous or synchronous setup, what Dr. Beatty wants is that they have equivalent learning outcomes. Okay, to contribute their developing ideas to the discussion and interact with the ideas of their peers. Providing equivalent learning experiences in various modes may be one of the greatest challenges, though, in Hyflex approach. There are alternative paths in Hyflex course that must lead to equivalent learning outcomes. So you have various participation modes that you can present content, engage students, and assess learning with different media and activities. But all students should be able to achieve the same learning outcome. So that is the very goal of equivalence principle. Okay. Next, we have reusability. So it utilizes artifacts from learning activities in each participation mode as learning objectives for all students. So considering all artifacts or materials, to be exact, from all learning environments that benefit current and future participants. So many class activities which take place in classrooms can be captured and represented in an online delivered form. For online students, you would have podcasts, videos, recording, discussion transcripts or notes, presentation files and handouts, and other forms of representation of in-class activities that can be very useful both for online students and for classroom students wishing to review after class session is finished. In a similar way, the activities completed by online students, such as chats, asynchronous discussion, file posting, and peer review, etc., can become meaningful learning resources for in-class students, as well as provide useful review materials for online students. And indeed, these materials from some learning activities, such as glossary entries, bibliographic resource collections, and topical research paper, may become perpetual learning resources for students in all modes of learning in future courses as well. Okay, so instructional materials in this case for reusability, okay, and student-generated artifacts or products or outputs from learning activities in each participation mode become learning resources for all students. So instructional material build once and use in all modes as appropriate. Okay, and last but not the least, for the principles, we have accessibility. So one of the major things that we were having a hard time with before was accessibility. Knowing that the internet connection in the Philippines needs improvement, or not all students have the ability, or let's have the means rather to buy gadgets and have everything online. So in accessibility, we equip students with technology skills and equitable access to all participation modes. So clearly, alternative participation modes are not valid alternatives if students cannot effectively participate in class activities in one or more modes. So if we give them just one channel of participation, let's say online, that would not be effective enough for the other setups. So clearly, alternative participation modes are not valid alternatives, again, if students cannot effectively participate in class activities in one or more models. So we have to provide options, choices, and other ways that students can participate in our class, may they be online or offline. So if a student is not physically capable of attending class, then in-class participation is not an option for that student. Okay? So if a student does not have convenient and reliable internet access, which usually happens with our students in the Philippines, diba? Then online participation may not be a realistic option for that student. So very good for those who had modules, for those who had offline resources. Okay? Other than that, for those who are capable of doing everything online, students need the technologies, hardware, softwares, and networks, and even skills in using technology in order to make legitimate choices about participation mode. It may be incumbent upon an instructor or academic program to provide resources and extra training to students and instructors so that flexible participation is a real option. Okay. Aside from it, another key aspect of accessibility that we should consider is the need to make all course materials and activities accessible to use and usable for all students. Okay, so for example, I think most of you are doing this already, audio or video recording that include text transcripts or closed captions, web pages, and learning management system must be screen reader friendly. And all forms of online discussion should meet universal design guidelines for accessibility. So as more students with varied learning mode abilities enter graduate programs and public, regulatory, and legal pressures for universal design for accessibility increase, this aspect becomes increasingly important. So I think not anytime soon we get to have, full face-to-face classes Still, some of our materials will be deployed online, and then we will need to be printing other materials for those who wouldn't be able to go online. Okay, so again, the four principles of Hyflex learning. Now, why is this important? Okay, or knowing and understanding the principles of Hyflex learning gives us an idea which factors us teachers, okay, should revise, remodel, or retain in our teaching. These very principles present where our students usually need assistance with. So for example, in my class, accessibility is one of the factors that some of my students face or have a hard time with, most especially if they are in places with difficult internet connections, or this is where equivalents go into the picture. How do students in the asynchronous mode have the same learning quality compared with those in sync session? So how do we handle these? Okay, so allow me to share with you the 3 phases I look into or I do in order for my students, in order for me to better handle them, assist them, monitor them as we go through our day-to-day lessons. And this is in accordance to the principles shared by Dr. Brian Biati. So we have the preparation phase, actual class, and then post-class. Okay, I always remind myself to begin with the end in mind. So I always ask questions, and through these guiding questions, I get to formulate how I am going to start my day, how am I going to prepare my materials. So we have here, do all students have the same device or same access? Others would think of these. What tools or applications can be used seamlessly in both environment, because they do not have the same model, unit for their gadgets or their laptops or their equipment. Okay, so we need to take into considerations this guiding questions that we have here. Others might have more questions in mind. So if you have some, you can have it in our comment section so that others would be aware of these guiding questions that you have in mind. Okay, now let's begin with the preparation phase. First off, you have to be consistent with the applications and software that you are using. You cannot keep on changing. Okay, because not all students, again, have the same model, equipment at home with them. Okay, or anything that they can bring with. So you have to have a core set of application that all students in the class must use, whether they are in person or remote. And there are many. Okay, some applications, some websites can be accessed even in offline mode already. Next with preparation is, of course, you have to record your instructions ahead of time. Or during your synchronous mode, do not forget to click the record button. The reality is that not all students will have success logging on to every synchronous lesson. Okay, so thus we have to think ahead of time that some of these students wouldn't be able to attend our synchronous session. So our discussion must be available to them even after our synchronous classes. Next, bear in mind to transform your tools. When you are designing learning experiences for students in your Hyflex classroom or in hybrid classroom, don't create 2 different lessons for each environment, but then transform. Okay, because what you have there for your synchronous classes, for your face-to-face classes, there is always a way to transform it so that it can serve its purpose for asynchronous sessions. Okay, so for those who have in Kahoot, in quizzes, you can always have that in printed mode. Okay, next, establish and reiterate routines. Okay, something that in online classes was or were neglected, the routines. Back then, students were really given strict routines, like when you go inside the classroom, you have to greet the teacher, you have to do this, do that. Okay, so even in our Hyflex mode, routines are important in any learning environment, especially when you can't be present with your students daily, okay, which is one of the downside of this pandemic. Okay, we can only be virtually present with our students. And some of our actions now that we do in face-to-face are restricted or limited already. Some are not even or not already applicable to our setup. But when you establish your routine, okay, please make sure that you simplify the routines. Do not make it complicated for the students, most especially for those who are in the lower years. Okay, you have to simplify it and you have to repeat it to them. Okay, next we have build communication norms. Okay, so back then, communication was very easy because our students are there in the same place as we are in the classroom. So in the setup, communication in an online environment is a unique skill that our students will indubitably use in the future. So setting norms for communication with teachers and even their parents, okay, will be crucial to classroom management online. Most especially if some of the instructions are difficult, we need to be available to our students. And we need to set a formal channel wherein we can communicate with our students. So you can have others create Facebook groups, messenger groups, have Google chat rooms. They could also do it by email. Okay, others, are kind enough to even give their cell phone numbers to build communication norms or easier communication. And of course, as we are building students, not just as independent learners, but also collaborative learners, when we group our student, let's not do it randomly. Okay, like B1 and then G3. No, you have to have a strategy on how you do it. You can categorize the students. You can use criteria to group your students. You can use the previous assessments to group your students, but never to group them randomly. Now that we are in this kind of setup, they do not see each other, or let's say some of the students will be in asynchronous mode, some would be in synchronous mode. So you can do it strategically that you group students in synchronous altogether and then asynchronous altogether. Okay, but never do it randomly. And one important thing as well, as part of the preparation phase, is to explain what plagiarism is. Okay, so check with your institution or your school and use simple strategies for ensuring work is original or cited. It's easier to cheat online, but it's also easier to catch improprieties. Be proactive and teach what plagiarism is and how to avoid it. Okay, so again, classroom management is not just, implementing rules. It's not just because behavior, but also creating a holistic environment for our students. All right. So again, that's our first phase. That is the preparation phase. Next, let's move on to the actual class phase. So what are these classroom management tips that we can use when we are already in the actual class? One is to build an engaging online environment. So in classrooms before, we have our reading corner, our chat corner. Okay, so create virtual spaces in your blended classroom or in your Hyflex setup that serve different purpose. Perhaps there's a lounge or chat room for side conversations because, again, these students have been away from each other because of the pandemic. All right, so we need to build an environment wherein they can freely communicate without disrupting our lessons, our discussions, and other students as well. Okay. And of course, we need to acknowledge student accomplishments. Affirmation as its best. When students are productive, engaged, and learning online, it is important to acknowledge them. So back then, there are different ways of showing our acknowledgement and affirmations to our students. There are stickers, there are prizes, okay, the little things that we get to give to our students. Well, that is for those who are in the face-to-face setup. How about those in online setup? You can have badges online, still stickers, but digital form, okay? Or even, you know, their own set of corner in your virtual classroom wherein you put the student of the day, okay, or you post PubMats highlighting students who were truly participative and achievers on a particular subject. So then again, we're not just implementing rules here, but also building, okay, a better environment for our student when we speak of classroom management. So we need to acknowledge student accomplishments, may they be face-to-face, online, or asynchronously. Other than that, another classroom management strategy that we have here is call and response. So to regroup the students or get their attention, a teacher can use the call and response technique. So this one is usually used for the younger ones, okay, wherein the teacher will say a phrase and they would have to continue it. Others would give a signal or a cue for clapping. So others would do the same thing. How about for higher levels? What could be the call and response there? Well, actually, even though they are in the higher levels, others still find these kinds of strategy fun. Okay, so you give a keyword or a clue word, and then they would have to respond to it. And of course, we should have our energizers, our screen breaks, our thinking breaks for a while we are having our discussion. You know, sitting in front of the monitor so for a very long time makes the students, you know, sleepy, some would be bored, idle thinking, wondering. So it's much better to put energizers in between your lesson. So after one unit of your lesson or one part of your lesson, you give a little bit of an energizer, make them move around, make them speak a little, most especially for those who are always silent or quiet. Okay? Could be a song, could be a game, a trivia. And then this one, we have the cold call. What is the cold call? In order to make participation the expectation, ayan, ito yung mga bagay na other teachers find difficult. Engaging the students, asking them to participate. There are times we need to do cold calling. So we call on students regardless of whether they raise their hands to answer a question. Okay, this will encourage students to always be attentive in class and will provide equal opportunity to all students to participate in discussions. Okay, so again, we give equal opportunity, not just for those who are usually participating, but also even those who are quiet sometimes. Okay, and lastly, for actual class phase, exit tickets. So students, both online and offline, need to answer short questions to gauge their learning from the discussion. So it could be in a form of Google form, it could be in Google Slides, others would have it on printed papers, they will just have to continue phrases, what I learned today. You can do it in, you know, spin the wheel mode, okay, or discussion boards for your learning management systems if you have one. Okay, so that is just the second phase. Okay, now, we do not just manage the students before, during, but most especially, we need to also manage how they are even after our session. So this is where post-class happen. So what do you do? Okay, after your classes are done, what do you usually do to manage the students' work, their behavior. Okay, so one would be, okay, we should always be open with evaluation or feedback box. So evaluation results help to improve programs and determine which one should be maintained, changed, or even removed. Okay, so as teachers, this classroom management is not just for our students. We need to ask them as well, how do they view or what their perspectives are with our discussions, with our activities. Okay, I think it's the best way that we get to know our students when we are open to their comments and suggestions as well. Okay, so again, evaluation or feedback box, not just from our administrators, our bosses, but also from our students. May it be a formal one, okay, or it could be something informal kind of feedback. Like you give them, give me a thumbs up if you find our discussion today easy, or a heart emoji. Okay, you just have to be creative with this one. Next, provide checklist, or rather create them for students or have students create them for themselves. So this can be for projects, due dates, group activities, whatever they need in helping them be organized and to be reminded of. All right. So again, these checklists, we have to have it available online and in printed mode as well. Okay. Next, as part even of our preparation phase is to have strong communication channels. So compared with an in-person classroom setting, teachers may not have the same level of interaction with students, okay, in a remote or blended learning environment. Therefore, finding ways to maintain connections and establishing proper communication etiquette will be crucial to building relationship with students and even their parents, and making sure their voices are heard, even if teachers don't see them face to face on a regular basis. So again, our strong communication channels available for our face-to-face students, synchronous students, and asynchronous classes. Okay, so to wrap up the three phases, allow me to show a summary of what we have discussed today. Okay, so recognizing the achievements of students, being consistent, okay, emphasizing digital citizenship, communicating clearly, having a weekly summary. This is where checklists could come into the picture, and looking forward with our meeting. And what I like the most about this one is, even in your own subjects, not just in your homerooms, you can have a class frequently asked question page. Okay, if you are the kind of teacher that who's not always online, you might want to include a frequently asked question page, or a PubMat perhaps, that you can share with your students online and offline. Okay, there we go. And of course, allow me to give a pabaon to everyone. Okay, so according to Carol and Tomlinson, we don't get to decide whether we have challenging students in our class, but we can certainly decide how we can respond to them. So in this session today, it's not our students who will always adjust their educators. We as teachers, okay, we need to make a way in order for our students, okay, learn. May it be in different modes, may it be in hybrid, blended, or Hyflex learning mode. What I have shared to you is not just for the Hyflex learning, but you can also adapt some of it, modify, revise in order to fit the kind of learning modality that you have in your respective institutions. Okay, so before I end this very video, I'll be sharing videos for you in order for you to learn more about Hyflex learning and classroom management. So stay tuned. Wait lang po.
In this video, we are going to address what the Hyflex model is. What is the Hyflex model? The first thing to understand about Hyflex is that it is a conceptual model for higher education. The Hyflex model allows students to choose to attend class either in person or remotely. Instructors develop two delivery methods, face-to-face and online. Both of these models must be synchronous with each other. Additionally, the strength and appeal of the Hyflex model is that the student has a flexibility in how they want to attend class. The goal is to deliver a class experience that is equivalent and effective.
What is classroom management? Classroom management is a concept that seems to be thrown around all sorts of communities. These include teacher education programs, new teachers, and even seasoned teachers. The core values and definition of classroom management may be similar. However, the evolutionary process and practice that educators use typically varies. There is not just one size fits all model for good teachers. In fact, if that was the case, a school would get pretty boring and learning opportunities would diminish. Luckily, there are many different varieties of stellar teachers around the world. Stylistically, some teachers may be similar. However, their personality often brings a uniqueness to their craft. Despite the differences in how teachers manage their classrooms, research suggests certain key components are essential. Teacher behavior. Good classroom management is based on the behavior of the teacher. This means if a teacher wants students to demonstrate behaviors in a certain way, the educator must model the desired action. How you work with students, regardless of their behavior, demonstrates the quality of the educator's classroom management. Teacher behavior that produces high student involvement and reduces student misbehavior is a solid definition of quality classroom management. Classroom procedures. Good classroom managers have classroom procedures. This research suggests that there should be a classroom procedure or process for every mainstream scenario or action that takes part in the classroom. Yes, there are times when unexpected events occur in your classroom and you have no choice but to go with what you feel is best at the moment. Let's be clear that some situations are not black and white. As the educator in charge, you will have the occasional hard decisions to make. One aspect that will challenge the music educator's wisdom questions when it is appropriate to be flexible, when you need to make a decision that is not popular, and how will you choose the battles that need to be fought. Fortunately, having clear and well-communicated classroom procedures will minimize serious conflicts. Typically, teachers who create clear classroom procedures tend to conduct themselves in a businesslike, appropriate, and task-oriented manner. Ineffective classroom management. In contrast, ineffective classes have no classroom procedures. Often teachers that have no procedures are more concerned with getting along with students. To this end, it is recommended that there should be a clear balance between the student-teacher relationship versus staying on task. If you know of a teacher that struggles with organization, clear procedures, and communication skills, schedule time to talk with them. Make this meeting relaxed and set it up in a non-confrontational manner. Offer to assist them in specific ways that will help them. If they refuse, then let them have their space. Unfortunately, many teachers and evaluators cannot provide specific problem identification, thus missing out on the opportunity to provide targeted solutions. However, if the experience results positively, then you may have just found a loyal friend for life. Effective teacher. Create a plan to be an effective teacher. Educators must become masters of planning if they expect their classroom management results to change. As a teacher, it is your responsibility to manage your class. If you just ignore this responsibility, then students will manage the classroom for you. When this occurs, students cannot be held liable and problems arise. Ultimately, the reasoning behind effective classroom management is to synthesize a productive working environment. Remember, strong classroom management skills lead to student engagement, which creates a positive learning environment. Conclusion: strong classroom management procedures are the tasks executed by the students based on teacher planning and expectations. This must take place in order for our students to increase their chances of learning and comprehension. As a result, students will achieve in the classroom and will have the ability to transfer skills to various real-life scenarios. This creates a routine that reinforces developing habits that will eventually produce contributing members of the community and the world. I hope you found this post insightful. Please take a moment to subscribe to The Music Educator and share it with someone. Thank you.
There we have it. In behalf of Vival Group Incorporated, I would like to thank our speaker for today, Miss Pauline Marie V. Herbacio, a junior high school faculty at her beloved alma mater, University of Santo Tomas, handling grade 8 English. Thank you, Miss Pauline, for this eye-opening and insightful learning session. It is an honor to have you with us today. And to all our Kavival viewers, all thanks to you for our continuous patronage to our daily learning session. Don't forget to register to get your e-certificate of participation. The is in the caption of this webinar. We encourage you to subscribe and watch on our official Bibal Facebook and YouTube channel. Muli, maraming salamat at magandang araw sa ating lahat.